Please join me in welcoming our speaker, John Falker.
Good morning, everyone. I got the honor to kick it off on the final day of NWISE. It's been a good couple of days, right? My name is John Falker. I lead threat intelligence for Trellix. And if you're not familiar with Trellix, Trellix is the merger between FireEye and McAfee Enterprise. And today, I'm here to talk to you about ransomware. Well, ransomware is a headline news. No secrets. MGM Grand, all the other institutions that we see. But this time, we're going to focus on something we did specifically to one strain. And the strain is REvil. If you're not familiar with REvil, we have some stuff to jog your memory. They made headline news with the attack against the ABS, Kaseya. Eventually, they also did some other attacks against Travelex in Europe. And notably, the Justice Department had a couple of takedowns, seized millions of dollars from affiliates, and arrested the individual behind the Kaseya attack. We at Trellix had somewhat of a collaboration with law enforcement in this way, and today I'd like to tell you a little bit more about what we did behind the scenes. And make no mistake, ransomware is a real threat. We know it. Well, we can care about casinos, but it's hospitals, it's municipalities, everything can be targeted by ransomware. So how did REvil operate at the time? So if you look at the REvil ransomware as a service model, as we call it, so those who actually build the ransomware and facilitate the platform are not always necessarily the ones doing the intrusion. REvil had about an admin group of about 5. We've done some stuff on their internal communications as well, so we can't really talk about that publicly, but we had access to their Jabber server. And with that, we could establish through analysis who played what role. And if we look at the admin group, there were 2 admins. They were tasked with managing the affiliates or the partners. So all the people that wanted to sign up for the ransomware as a service, they were managed by those people managers, you might call them. So they got all the basic questions and all the other things. And then there were 2 individuals who were responsible for building the back-end system, building the payment system, building the portal, building everything from the leak sites, as well as there was, we believe, 1 individual responsible for actually building the malware. And that's interesting, because these are all different areas of expertise, and they team up. And that's what we often see with these larger groups. The people who build the back-end panel or the back-end system is not necessarily the one building the best low-level C code. So these admin developers, they had affiliates. REvil, or Sonokibi, if you're not familiar, is an offshoot of GandCrab. There's a lot of debate about if they're different or whatever, but through the Jabber analysis and through all the stuff that we've done, the code analysis, we can safely say that the core group of admins was in fact responsible from GandCrab also for REvil. And the fact that they started REvil was, we believe that GandCrab kind of blew out of proportion. REvil had about 40 affiliates at any given time, whereas GandCrab, its predecessor, had about 150. And they got a little bit too much attention. So at a certain moment in time, they closed down GandCrab and started REvil with hand-picked affiliates that were capable enough to create the big infections, target the larger companies. And in order to do the attacks, these affiliates have to maintain a sample. As well, in order to join, they had a job interview. It's just like a regular company. And if you look at the job interview posting, sorry, I'm ahead of myself. If you look at that, when they are in the group, they can actually acquire the malware. So they have a target, they will go to their panel, and you will see the panel later on, and they can request the binary and then infect the victim. So some of the victims they would infect would be individuals. So we had affiliates that we monitored that were actually targeting larger scale of smaller consumers and all these things. But the big bucks came from the ones that target hospitals, municipalities, and larger organizations, the headline news that you see. When an organization gets hit, they will go into the ransom negotiation, they will pay the ransom, and with REvil, the ransom was paid automatically. It was through a Bitcoin tumbler being tumbled, so through BitMix Biz, they had a API connection, it got laundered, and the affiliates would get a percentage of the ransom, usually 70%, of the ransom would go to the affiliate or to the group that actually did the intrusion, and then 30% went to the admin group. Sometimes it was 80-20. It depends on how skilled and how good the affiliate group was. So if you want to investigate this group, where do you start? And this group was very successful. So often, well, sometimes we analyze malware and you find mistakes. But in this case, we took a different approach. And we said, like, well, what if we study the success to find the weakness? So what is it that they did really well? They were operating like a legitimate business. And can we take some of these key factors that make them successful, turn it around against them? So what were the key success factors? What made them so successful? And maybe we can actually identify something with which we can break the system. REvil had a dedicated communication platform versus email negotiations. If we talk about ransomware groups, the larger groups that are doing large-scale extortion, you would see that the most efficient groups will probably choose for a platform in which they can chat with their victims versus an email address. We all know the Move IT breach that happened recently, where Klopp exfiltrated a large amount of data from, I think, from 2,500 organizations, and they were still doing email negotiations. For us, that is a flag that they were really prepared of what was coming their way. Because, mind you, I have trouble managing my own inbox. I don't know about you, but negotiating with 2,500 victims at any given in time and just mixing it up, and not mixing it up, that's quite a challenge. So often we'll see these groups, like Lockbit is doing right now, that will have a dedicated platform with which you can negotiate with the team. One of the things they did as well, they followed suit from the Maze ransomware that is now defunct as well. They built a leak site. And the leak site, you had there's an example here, what you see. That is an external marketing tool. Yes, it's used to put more pressure on the victim. And if you have a victim that has valuable data and is scared that it will breach the confidentiality, this works really well. But what this also does is external marketing. Nobody wants to end up on this webpage. Nobody wants to be seen here, and it instills fear. So it's an external marketing tool for these groups to show their face. Mind you, REvil was actually their blog, or their happy blog as they call it. Their webpage was quite clean, but there's other groups out there that make it feel with animations and all kinds of stuff that are basically a marketing website. And this is a very important thing if you're in the business of ransomware. I think we saw this with other cases. There's cases of nation-state deployed ransomware, which was basically a wiper because it wasn't as stable. But we also seen examples of other ransomwares that came after REvil that did not have a stable decryptor. So the essence of building a solid financial-driven ransomware group is that when you encrypt, you can also decrypt. If you encrypt and everything's corrupt, you can do it once or twice, and then word gets out and your victims are not paying. So it's bad for business. So how do you announce that you have a good decryptor? Well, they did that on their website. And they actually said, like, don't believe our word for it. Look at what the community is writing on it. So whenever ourselves or another company or even Mandiant would write something about a decryptor being stable and the malware code being stable, these criminals will use that as a way to promote what they're doing and saying, like, hey, you can trust us, we'll decrypt your stuff and you'll get everything back. A great example of how it went wrong is Babuk. That happened in the recent years. They were working on an EXXI, a VMware type of locker, which backfired. So it could encrypt, but it corrupted everything on the VMware server, on the EXXI server, and every organization lost their data. So those affiliates, putting a lot of effort in those intrusions, getting a defected encryption algorithm, basically corrupting their victims' data, they came back to the admins and to the developers. They're like, hey, what the heck? You gave me something that doesn't work. Now I look like a fool. So you would see that there's cracks in the armor that happened after that. Another thing they were good at, and I hinted on it previously, is they had affiliate spots, but they were really strict on who to invite. They had a job interview. So what you see right here is a screenshot from xss.is, and this is the actual invite or the actual announcement that they had available slots within their network, so within their crime group, and they were looking for people with these qualifications. And it's interesting. You need to know something about NAS, tape, preferably something about Metasploit or Cobalt Strike, and you need to have a good understanding of an Active Directory and kebab roasting and some Hyper-V. It kind of sounds like a marriage between a sysadmin and a pen tester. And make things complete, there's a 2-week trial period, so it's just like a real job. And the 70-30 or the 75-25, that's the percentage that they give to their affiliates and what they keep themselves. We've tried to infiltrate the network as a affiliate. Didn't work. We didn't pass the test. We weren't skilled enough, or we didn't speak Russian good enough. We had some folks that did, but eventually they're very strict on what they do. And if you don't perform, you get a warning, and then the second time you're getting kicked out, and then the new announcement appears. Another thing that they did really well, what we saw, is that they outsourced. So they were really good at establishing, okay, this is our core competency, this is our swim lane, and eventually when they grew, they were like, okay, but maybe we are not as good at this phase. Let's find an external party that is an expert at this phase in our crime kill chain, and offer this to our users, either at a discount or in a partnership. So this is an advertisement for GangCrab. It's one or the other, it doesn't really matter. But this is actually an announcement for a partnership for a crypter. So this is a malware crypto service that is partnering up with GangCrab, REvil ransomware, and saying, well, you get a nice discount. And it offers to their affiliates a way to encrypt the malware payload that is undetectable by traditional legacy AV. And you would see this over and over. This is just on the front side, so encrypting your malware, but on the back-end side with money laundering and Bitcoin payments, there was also partnerships with known Bitcoin mixing services. And it's much like if you have a pizza place, right? Everybody knows Uber Eats. Everybody knows the pizza places when you grew up. They had their own dedicated driver driving the pizzas, and it was great. But if there was no orders, that driver was paid by the pizza parlor, and he was just sitting there reading the newspaper. And nowadays, we have Uber Eats that takes the whole logistic chain out of your hands. So by doing so, that pizzeria can focus on what they're good at. And that is what essentially, that's what successful cybercriminals do as well. They find partners they trust and then focus on what they're good at. Lastly, good administration. If you want to set up that cybercriminal empire, you want to build and you want to make a lot of money and have a lot of victims, and your payout is based on commission or a percentage, how do you track what affiliate did and how much they would get paid? It's not that they're on a payroll. They need to have a percentage of the actual payment of a specific victim. Yeah, and if you have 40 of these affiliates and they're infecting, let's say, X amount per person, it becomes pretty difficult. So REvil was smart about this. And they actually built in a configuration file with some indicators in each and every single binary that they developed, essentially linking the victim, which had a unique binary, to a specific affiliate, and then the payout they could link back together. So good administration is very essential, because, mind you, there's no real trust among cybercriminals. Loyalty comes with paying your debts. So if REvil did not pay their debts to the people that are doing the work, yeah, trust goes out the door. And you will see later on what happens. So accounting is pretty hard. It's pretty hard for cybercriminals, and we see that a lot of these cybercriminals, and let it be, this is ransomware, but we've seen it with botnet infections, where they have indicators as well. But this case was very interesting, because accounting is hard, but those affiliate numbers, or those numbers in the binary, really help. So what I said, they had something to link the victim to the binary to the specific affiliate. And luckily enough, because it was in every binary, and we have a lot of binaries, we were able to build a tool to integrate or extract these figures from every binary that we found and do some forensic accounting. This is the actual configuration file, or bit cleaned up, what REvil included in their binaries. So you see the file name, it has the indicators like PK, PID, sub, and the description. Mind you, the description is something we put on there that we didn't get, they weren't nice enough to give that to us. There's a lot of flags you can set when you create the binary, but I want you to attend your focus to the top ones, the PID and the sub ID. And for the longest time, we were a bit puzzled by what is this? Because it was a numeric value. And when we looked at the PID, which the explanation says affiliate number, so that's the partnership number, we saw some characteristics. It was a numeric value that slowly increased over time, incremental, but it didn't really grow as much. So we saw lower numbers appear again, some higher numbers. It was an interesting characteristic. And then the sub number, which is the campaign ID, was interesting as well, because that went up into like the thousands. However, there was a link. Every sub ID had only one parent. So the sub ID had one parent, that's the PID, but the PID could have had multiple campaigns. And by those combinations, we were like, wait a second, this actually might be that we're looking at the number value that represents an affiliate, and the campaign ID is the value that represents a specific attack. So why don't we use our backend and collect all these binaries that we can find from REvil, GangCrab, and all of them, and extract it at large, and do some forensic accounting. So that's what we did. And what you see here in the animation are all these binaries that we pulled, and in the first column you can see the affiliate number, and then you can also see the campaign ID, and then link to the MD5 of the actual sample. And these are hundreds of samples. And essentially what you're looking at is a roster that shows you which affiliate is the most active. And that's interesting, because before this, if you have no idea who's part of this group, or you have no underground intelligence interacting and getting human source, this is a method to determine who is of value to this network. Because you can link those infections, and you can see who is requesting the most binaries, making the biggest deal, bringing in the most money to the organization, and actually might be of interest to track. But if we have all these ingredients, great. This is what you need to build, or what REvil used to build a successful empire. However, there's one thing that they didn't do, or at least not all of them. Some of them weren't really humble, and they started to brag. So we had this analysis done, we had some Jabber analysis, and we're still like, okay, but it wasn't there yet. So they're making tons of money, and the bragging didn't help. Because we published a blog a while back, and that was when we were still McAfee, and it was Follow the Money. And essentially what happened was one of the major affiliates in this crime group was bragging on a cybercriminal forum. I have a history in law enforcement. I've done cybercrime, but also organized crime. And in organized crime, when you see criminals brag about stuff, they have nice cars and expensive watches and yachts and all these things. And yes, we have Jacobets with his Lamborghini and all these things, but it's interesting how this specific cybercriminal was bragging. And this is his posting on XSS. His name is Lalartu, and he's bragging. And he says, vroom, vroom, motherfucker. Nice translation. Don't be afraid. That is the sound of my Lamborghini growling. But what is he referring to? And that's what you see in the little thing where we blow it up a little bit. These are transaction IDs for his negotiations that he did. So these are the actual ransoms paid over a weekend period, and he obfuscated the transactions ID slightly, thinking that nobody would find out. So he's bragging about how much he made with ransomware. Well, luckily we have tooling as well to trace the transactions IDs, and we did. And we can confirm that this individual made about $300,000 in one weekend. That's not a bad paycheck. It's like, I called my boss and I was like, well, that's maybe we need a raise, because this guy is doing, he's making some decent money. Except he has to watch his shoulder and he has to watch his back constantly, and we don't. We can go to bed and sleep cleanly. We do know where he lives, and we do know this individual. Later on, he's also the US Justice Department seized a large amount of money from him as well. So we have information on this, and that's ongoing. But it never helps. This blog did not go unnoticed. Because you can brag about all the money that you have, but to quote one of my favorite rappers, more money brings more problems. And that also goes for cybercriminals. So sure enough, we published this blog. We didn't think too much about it. It was interesting to see. We actually expected a reaction from Mr. Lalartu himself. However, we had an informant. Somebody else reached out to us. And that was interesting because it was just, I had a Friday afternoon and it was in the fall, and our media department came to us and said, John, we have this interesting individual. We don't know a first name or last name, and he says he has information and he needs to talk to you. I was like, okay, well, bring him along. And this individual had a nickname, and it was all secretive. But sure enough, I started talking, and very quickly we uncovered, hey, wait a second, he's trying to snitch. He said, like, yeah, I have information on Lalartu, and I want to quit this work, I want to quit this industry, and I have a kid coming along, and I want to better my life and all that stuff. But he was essentially offering information on Lalartu to us in exchange for money. However, we're not in a position to pay cybercriminals, especially not for this. That is something that we leave to our law enforcement parties. And luckily enough, we were part of that working group, so we had close contacts with this individual, or with law enforcement entities that could actually facilitate this. So at the same time we were talking to the informant, we were also talking to the law enforcement entities, so like, hey, we have somebody, it might be interesting, but they said like, okay, yeah, we'll take over that contact, but give us 2 weeks because we need to set up our sock puppets and backstopping. And I was like, okay, great, yeah, I'll just chat with him from my corporate email and everything's fine. But anyways, by chatting with him, we soon figured out he was dealing in info stealer logs. So he was a criminal doing info stealers, and he did not get paid by Lalartu. So he felt like, hey, I got compromat on you, I got some dirt, let me give that to somebody else who is listening. So we started talking, and he was really, really open in their conversations. And for me, the phone number was not really the most important thing. For us, it was understanding the dynamics within this network. Who did what? Who was responsible for what? Who was calling the shots? Because that could give us a better understanding of who was actually in charge. And he was very open about that. And we asked him about TTPs, what kind of tools. So if we looked at it and we started talking, he explained every single tool that they were using and how they were using it. From our clone, InfoStealer logs, he was sharing some files with us and showing, okay, we're filtering, he filters for this and this and this. These are the corporate loggings that they use. All kinds of stuff. And this is prime intelligence. This is before the Conti leaks, this is before everything else. So for us, this was really nice because we could integrate all these tools and how they were used in our portfolio to make sure that everything works. And we shared this as well with our contact groups. But he also had access to the panel. And the REvil backend panel had a really interesting functionality. It had a sort of guest function, so you could show somebody else around. And he was very smart because he took screenshots. So what you see here is the actual backend panel of REvil. And on the left side, on the big field, you see the actual infections taking place. In the middle is a zoom in on an infection. And on the other side, in the blue area, that's where the chats take place. So those are the multiple chats that you can jump in. And what's interesting, if you kind of zoom in on, this was actually a beautician in the US that got ransomed. We were able to trace this back to some other research that we did with other companies. And we can confirm these were legit infections. So it was not a trick shot. We can actually bring that back. And it's interesting, if you look at the middle face, you see Lalartu, and you see the account. So when an individual would start to chat, a little bell would ring, and they would actually bring up a chat function, and you can chat with the individual. And what was interesting is that the source also told us Lalartu liked the sound of the coin. And at the time, that didn't make sense to me. I was like, okay, what is that? What do you mean by the sound of the coin? So apparently, if a victim paid up and they paid the ransom, internally in this dashboard, there was a sound file, and it sounded like a coin dropping on the floor. So I have the coin in the presentation, so fingers crossed you can hear it. And if not, no. There you go. And then it all makes sense. So who says cybercriminals don't have a sense of humor, right? If you paid close attention, you can see that accounting is a double-edged sword. So we spoke a little bit about these factors, what makes that group successful, what can really make them monitor who is doing what and do the payouts. But the back end gave us a really, really good look at how it was organized. So I hinted already on Lalartu. And within the brackets, you see the number 33. And with the wax beautician, you see another number in the thousands. So that correlates with the PID number and the sub-ID number. So essentially, we only had a screenshot of the backend. What if we had the complete backend? We had the complete roster, and we could link every single affiliate, every single person, with every single attack and everything they were responsible for. And what was interesting in that backend panel, there was also an option where you, as a cybercriminal, could put in your Bitcoin address where you wanted to receive the funds after laundering. So after they went through the tumbler. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. So if only we knew where this was. Anyways, they also had another interesting feature in the back end, which the source showed. And that's like every corporate program has a reward program, right? You can give a bonus to somebody else in your organization if they've done a great job. These cybercriminals had the same. And what you see here are the real animated GIFs with the dollar amounts that they could give as a bonus or as a thank you to their other co-criminals. And the more money it is, the more money it shows in the animated GIFs. And I thought this was hilarious because, yeah, they're still human, right? So they had a whole thing set up that if you wanted to tip somebody or give them a Bravo or a money reward, it will go through a Bitcoin tumbler and they will get to receive the reward afterwards. So that was very, intricate and funny to see as well. This wasn't all that the source shared with us at the time. I kind of played dumb when we were talking with him just to get more information. And I said, and he unknowingly shared the keys to the kingdom, and that's what you see here. So I was chatting with him, we were talking, and I just said, hey, listen, how do you log in? How did you get those screenshots? Where do you go? And just explain it. And he said, oh, yeah, we have to put some stuff in Tor. We have the Tor website. I need to alter my configuration. And then you log into a portal, and then you could get access. And he shared this screenshot with us. And this is, you see the Onion domain, and it's a portal. It's not really, that doesn't really say anything. And he probably didn't think a lot of it. And Tor sites are hidden. So at first glance, nothing really stands out. And just as a basic SOP, we run a lot of the scans and all that stuff. As a long shot, we performed a search on the title that you can see in the top, called Private Project. Interesting enough, there weren't a lot of websites online, if we scanned with Shodan and all the other sensors, that actually had a website called Private Project with the same screenshot. There were actually 4 private projects in the world, 3 of which were Azerald and something else, and one of this was this actual backend, which is very interesting because by doing so, we found the clear web IP of the backend panel. So the thing that was hidden for the longest time, we now know where it was situated. And tying that back to what we know that was on the panel and what we know data-wise, what we could have with all the Bitcoin addresses and everything else and all the affiliates, yeah, we kind of jumped in the air. We're like, holy smokes, we actually know where this is. So yeah, we opened our laptops, wrote a really, really thick report that went to law enforcement, to the Operation Gold Dust team with Europol and the FBI. And we said, well, we know where it is. We won't disclose it here where it was because it's no longer there. But yeah, that made us very happy. And fast forward, there were a lot of things set in motion. If you can remember, the Kaseya attack was very known, and then afterwards, the US government took some offensive actions against this group. And we can't really, you never get an answer if it was due to us officially, but there are things that were done that were able to tie them in. And what was very positive, we worked a lot with the Dallas field office, was when this indictment came out. This is the individual that was charged for the hack against Kaseya, the Ukrainian individual that got flown over to Dallas, and he confessed. He's being sentenced. And building that tool to pull out the affiliate IDs, to do all that stuff, to link the binary to the victim, to the affiliate, it was very cool to see that we came full circle, and then the ID number that was actually pulled from the binary was included on the indictment. And this is why we do it, right? It essentially led to more takedowns, more individuals. The 2.3 million is seized from Lalartu, by the way, and that was a good success. Later on, the FSB made some other arrests. We don't think there were the high-level affiliates. They were still at large, but at least that was prior to the Ukraine war. It did give off a strong sign at the time, and I was very happy. It was very fragile, that collaboration, but it was hopeful. We were monitoring a lot of chatter, and we could see like, oh, these individuals are actually generally scared now. They think they're actually going to jail. And believe it or not, this is the essence of the work that we do. I think all of us here, this is mission first. This is how we make a difference. These are the individuals that are targeting our organizations and everything else. So anything we can do, this is what gets me up in the morning. A good cup of coffee and going to work and working on this stuff. And I truly believe that our industry can do a lot of soulful work. We have the key to building a safer society and allowing us to do a lot of great things. So there's a lot of talk about REvil making a comeback. So I think maybe 3/4 of a year, maybe a year later, the website came back online, the Happy blog. And it was like, oh, REvil's back. And there were new victims, which was interesting, because if we go all the way back to how I started, there were different affiliates or different admins building the website and doing things, and there were other admins building the code, the actual code for the malware. So yes, if you have the Tor private key, you can set up the Tor website, launch it, and rebuild it, and then, okay, it's there. That doesn't mean that you still have the same backend infrastructure with all the binaries and everything else. And that's what we saw. All the attacks where we can get the binary from and all the new REvil samples that we got, they were just slight variations of one sample we already saw. And they broke the rule of having the sub-ID and then the campaign ID, the parent-child relationship, that wasn't there. It was like a mishmash. So that makes us feel like, okay, somebody has a binary and they keep on adjusting it slightly, but it's not the original group. And maybe there's 1 or 2 individuals involved, but not the original gang. And this is the common consensus across also the law enforcement entities. And most recently, we saw a re-emergence of the REvil hacktivist group joining our friends of Killnet and FNATO and all the other groups. And they're making an appearance, which doesn't really make sense. REvil was built because GandCrab got too much attention, and they wanted less attention. So why would you join a hacktivist group, putting all the attention on your name? Why would you, if you want to reinstate or you want to continue doing ransomware, continue with this name? It is all against the patterns that we have seen in the past. But if you have any good information, there's still $10 million out there. So if you want to have a good paycheck, we can always go out to the FBI and call them, and who knows? You might not have to work anymore. So yeah, lessons learned. If we look at the criminal success factors that we talked about, the dedicated comms, the leak side for like the marketing, having the stable malware, an increase of affiliate spots and everything, and having good outsourcing and good administration, if we flip that around and we put that in our businesses, then yeah, automation and centralization of processes is essential. Promote your work efforts. Show what you do. Market it. Internal and external. Show where you create that value, because you can work hard, but the further along you go in the chain of command, people will not be visible to the actual changes that you're making. And have a reliable product or service. Stand for your product. Make sure it works. Hire good people. Well, that's a no-brainer, right? It's better to have 5 lions than 500 sheep. And focus on the things that you're good at. We see very often if you have smaller teams and you need to grow in a business, they will often take everything in their own control just because it's easy. But delegating and trusting other processes in an organization is just as important. And if you're a small business, make sure you can align with other companies that can take that worry out of your hand, that logistics worry. And credit is credit. Give credit where credit is due. Especially in a team, there's create a culture of accountability, ownership, and give everybody full credit if they did the work. Because, yeah, it might not be cyber criminals, but if you don't do that, you risk losing that employee, or it could be an insider risk, and it can be all kinds of things. And with that, I'd like to thank you, and great that you were able to listen to the story about how we help take REvil down. And I think we have some time for some Q&A.
Yes, we can take a few questions. John will also be available after the session. That's okay.
That's the downside of a really large room.
Right? I felt bad. I was like the farthest away I could possibly be from him. Thank you. This was really good analysis. Question for you. When you did the analysis of the binaries and you saw the number of potential affiliates and the number of victims, roughly how many affiliates were there and roughly how many victims per affiliate?
That's a great question. So it kind of differs. When we looked at GandCrab, we did a similar analysis on GandCrab. We had about 150 affiliates. And mind you, you start looking at it at a certain moment in time, and then you don't have the number 150, but that kind of grows up. And then you see other numbers lower kind of move out. And with REvil, there was around 40. So we could actually establish at the end, the heydays or the end days of GandCrab, the latest functions, the latest versions that they pushed out, that we grabbed. We were seeing some of the most prominent affiliates that were doing a lot of the infections that were no longer there. It was really weird. It was almost like there's this successful party, and you have all the good guests that are partying, and they're the light of the party, and all of a sudden they're gone. So where did they go? Did they retire? Did they go to a new party or whatever? And sure enough, we saw new affiliates with the REvil gang with a different number, but a similar infection method, and all the MO was the same as that we saw with the GandCrab group. So that's some of the things that we saw, about 150 to 40 in that way.
Hi, this is fascinating. How did you extrapolate real-world geographic data from the Tor login portal that led to the arrests?
The geographic data of the Tor website, you mean? Well, that was normally you can do like there's multiple ways of deobfuscating a Tor website if they make a mistake, server status page, or through e-tagging and all kinds of things. There's things you could do. This was downright real simple. They made a mistake, and there was a clear web version of this website on an IP address behind a certain port. So the only thing we had to do was search on Shodan and census and all that stuff for the exact web page title, and then it popped up. And then we can correlate with the data that we have. So we had the IP address, and we can do some port scans and other stuff, and we said, like, okay, this is not a proxy, this is the actual machine. And that gave us the confidence, okay, we could link one and one together. Mind you, we were working in a law enforcement entity as well with a task force group where we had somewhat access to do analysis on their backend Git system. So this group was that professional that they had a Git setup, they had testing servers, pre-production and production servers. So anything in their crime ring, you think about 20 to 30 different servers. So we could actually correlate what we saw on that backend system, which was unknown yet, to some of the stuff that we saw in the code on their GitHub repository, and we can link one and one together, and they gave us the confidence, okay, this is where we need to be. Oh, they're making you work, Mark.
So this is a bit of a loaded question. This particular situation was being driven through a criminal element, and as such, there was a financial motivation behind the work done to get access, encrypt, and capture that. How many of the lessons learned from the criminal could also be let's just say, leveraged for state actor players who have a very different motivation factor in terms of getting into enterprises or just taking over your machines, potentially with a very long lead to whatever they're trying to achieve out of your environment. And it's not to take your money, but maybe espionage or for other aspects. So I'm just trying to understand, like, how are these lessons learned in taking advantage of the vulnerabilities and the criminal elements also being translated into helping protect enterprises for other factors that may not be as obvious as, send your crypto here?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, these success factors that we set apart are very specific for financially driven cybercrime. We often see, if we look at the state-sponsored attacks, especially in the long-term espionage cases, they have a tendency to build the tooling in-house. So the fact that they want to outsource that is not the case, because there is more secrecy involved, whereas financially driven cybercriminals have more an incentive to make money and make money fast. What is interesting that we do see a shift predominantly from certain threat actors that are now leveraging a lot of the tools that we see with ransomware actors as well, and a lot of living off the land tools, things that are just not malicious by nature, but can be used in a malicious fashion or with a malicious intent on a victim's network. Like the full typhoon case was very obvious, where they described all these living off the land tools, and at the time the report came out and everyone was like, oh, this is new. And I was like, well, ransomware actors have been doing this for many years and very successful. We do think that lines are getting more and more blurred. That became obvious when we looked at the Conti leaks in depth. We have a very big, thick, extensive blog on this as well. And we did see there was somewhat of a relationship or a mentioning of the regime. And honestly, that's the stuff that keeps me up at night. Like, yeah, we always looked at state-sponsored attacks predominantly for intelligence gathering, and then it's not an attack, then it's more of an espionage intrusion. However, we now live in a world where hacktivism and all the other things and causing disruption is a political goal. And we see it with sandworm as well, even though they're loud as hell. But if we take the affiliation or the somewhat relationship between ransomware actors on the crime side and a certain regime, and that they are known, and we saw it with Yakubets, we see it with Lalartu, we see it with others, that they're known to the Russian administration. We take that into account, and then we look at how these groups are now splintered off. I would not be surprised, and this is a hypothesis we have. We don't have full proof, but it's a hypothesis that we have, that these ransomware groups might actually cause disruption to the West, not nearly only for financial motivation, but maybe for just a disruptive effect, because it serves a certain narrative for a certain administration. So I think a lot of organizations should not only be looking at the low and slow and the intrusions that take a lot of time and fly under the radar, but they should clearly take a look at the MOs of the ransomware actors. Because if you want to talk about a group that has been specialized in going from one single access point to complete control of your network in the most limited amount of time, ransomware actors is those are the groups that are actually specialized in that.
Okay, one more question, and then John will be available.
Sure. Just going back to the clear web presence. So the domains that you discovered, were they present in lists of well-known feeds like open source or enterprise feeds? Like what were the IOCs like? Were they engaged in other activity?
Sorry, can you go the first part of the question?
Yeah, so the clear web presence that you discovered, yeah. The domains that you discovered, were they present in lists of IOCs that you'd already scanned? Like what other activity were they engaged in? Were they known to the industry in general?
You mean the backend infrastructure?
Yeah.
No, that was not known. They were very clean on not exposing that. So that was a lot of hard work, a lot of collaboration, figuring out where things were, working with some hosting providers and all this stuff. So we found, for instance, the Jabber server that we worked on by applying for a job at GandCrab. We did not get the job, but we did know what their Jabber ID was, and with that we could establish where the Jabber server was located, and then we could work with the authorities to get a copy, join investigation, and that kind of build it off from there.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you. Have a great day.